was Professor of Sociology at the University of Glasgow in the School of Education. Professor Arday has also held a position as of Associate Professor in Sociology at Durham University and Deputy Executive Dean for People and Culture in the Faculty of Social Science and Health. He's a visiting professor at The Ohio State University in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and an honorary professor at Durham University. Jason also holds other visiting professorships at the University of Glasgow and the Nelson Mandela University, and he's a trustee of the Runnymede Trust at the UK's leading race equality think tank and the British Sociological Association. In November 2023, he was named the fourth most influential person with a disability in the UK on the Show Trust Disability Power List 100. So they are going to be speaking first. Then we will have our third speaker tonight, Nira Yuval-Davis, who is a professor emeritus and the honorary director of the Research Center on Migration, Refugees and Belonging at the University of East London. A diasporic Israeli socialist feminist, as she describes herself, Nira has been active in different forums against racism and sexism in Israel and other settled colonial societies, as well as in the UK and in Europe. Among other activities, she has been the president of the research network O5 on racism, nationalism, indigeneity, and ethnic relations from the International Sociological Association. She's a founder member of Women Against Fundamentalism, the International Research Network on Women in Militarized Conflict Zones, and the Social Scientists Against the Hostile Environments. Nira Yuval-Davis has won the 2018 International Sociological Association Distinguished Award for Excellence in Research and Practice. The article she has written with Wimmis and Cassidy on everyday bordering, belonging, and the reorientation of British immigration legislation has won the 2019 Sage Sociology Award for Excellence and Innovation. Among her books, it's a long list, I will highlight Women Against Fundamentalism and Bordering, and she's currently developing her recent article in Sociology on anti-Semitism as racism into a book. And her works have been translated in more than 10 languages. So I'll give the floor to Chantelle and Jason. At the end, we will have a brief moment to collect some Q&A questions, and afterwards we will go to the party. So Jason and Chantelle.
Good evening, ESA. How are you all keeping? You all well? I was going to say, you all look absolutely beautiful. No, you really do. Are you enjoying the week? Yeah? Are you enjoying the week? It's like children's assembly, honestly. Chantelle, how are you keeping? You well?
I'm good, Jay. I'm having a bit of a pinch me moment. As a A-level sociology student, did I think I'd be doing a plenary at the ESA?
Yeah.
As a junior research fellow, definitely not. So I feel very humbled and excited, yeah.
No, it is amazing. And I guess, first, before Chantelle and I go into anything, this is absolutely beautiful. So just all the effort that the committee have put in, having us all here, watering and feeding everyone as the way you have done. Just thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, the committee.
Okay, so by hook or crook, we're going to take you through a playlist. Chantelle and I are going to try and give you a harvest for the world. So you'll notice the theme. So Isley Brothers to start off with, but it's going to go through some sort of chronological thinking, and hopefully it'll all make sense. So we're on the minutes, so we'll make a start. So,
can we have our first slide, please? Can everyone see our first slide on the screen?
No.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. So, conference plenary theme is around kind of trust. And I guess what Chantelle and I are going to attempt to do is really think about how we kind of intersperse this or intertwine this within several different tenets. So hopefully it'll make sense. if nothing else, Chantelle and I are going to have a loose jam, and you're going to have to indulge us for half an hour. So, Chantelle, just to start off with, politics of love, trust, neurodiversity, hope and trust. What does it look like in the 21st century?
Well, I think before I get into the detail of that, it's probably just worth saying that Jason and I have written a book about the politics of neurodiversity, and the key tenets of the book is talking about actually love, trust, hope, and solidarity. And part of how we do that is by looking at the combination of Black subjectivity, racialization, class, and then interfuse that with a kind of neurodiversity paradigm. One of the reasons why we're speaking like this is because when we wrote our book, we actually wrote it like this. So a lot of our book was actually transcribed through the spoken word, neurodivergent method, if you will. So when we present on the book, we also try and do it in this way as well. So, to your question, Jay. Sowing the seeds of love, how do we conceptualize hope and trust in the 21st century? So, starting with trust and thinking about what we tried to do with the book is focus on subjectivity first and foremost, and how our own black subjectivities are impacted by structure. And by structure, we're looking at the institutions that form the basis of our lives and lived experiences, whether that's education, the criminal justice system, our families. So looking at trust is always about how we're interacting with those as Black neurodivergent people. Now, that being said, trust is also about us looking at this tension between structure and agency, and the extent to which us as agents can impact trust or change trust or be transformed by trust. So when we're going through this presentation now, we really want to expand the tension between structure and agency, but also think quite critically about it. And then when it comes to hope, now this is where we're going to get into a kind of bit of spiritual terrain here. Hope is the idea for us that we are all part of a collective consciousness. So everything has a cause and effect. And with that being said, that sometimes means that we have to either field, listen to, or hold space for things that maybe seek to cause us harm. But the trust and then the hope in that is that the collective conscious will somehow bring us together and help us to rise up against things that seek to harm us.
Beautiful. I mean, for me, this idea of hope and trust is a bit of a high wire act in terms of mobilising lots of different things. And I guess one of the things we are trying to kind of straddle is also what does that mean in the context of neurodiversity, generally speaking. So how would you conceptualise neurodiversity? Because I think it means different things to different people across the intersection.
Yeah, definitely. And forgive me, everyone, I'm going to read a little bit from the sheet here for this, because for the neurodiversity paradigm, there'll be a lot of people that are familiar in the room with this way of thinking and looking at society, but there'll be many that aren't. But for us, one of the reasons why we now, as race and class scholars, why we now lean much more towards the neurodivergent paradigm is because we see it as a way to create multi-class and multi-ethnic solidarities across looking at how we disrupt neurotypical hegemony, and that being about power. So one of the reasons why I want to sort of say exactly what we mean is because we see this as a really important unifying principle. So for us, neurodiversity has been inspired by the author and educator Nikki Walker. So Nikki Walker's definition of neurodiversity is that of the diversity of human minds and the infinite variation in neurocognitive functioning within our species. So with neurodiversity, we're actually talking about a collective political and social project and movement which contains a variety of different groups, people, affiliates, goals, and viewpoints. But key to the neurodiversity paradigm and the neurodiversity movement is looking at the materiality of life. How do we make life more livable for those most vulnerable? And where we're seeing some of the most inspiring work are those that have been marginalised the most through disability and neurodivergence. Now, secondly, we use Kassem Assemusu, who states that neurodivergence is a way for an individual or group to describe how their trait or traits show up. So, for example, neurodivergence ranges from autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, ADD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, cognitive functioning difficulties, executive dysfunction, dysgraphia, misphonia. slow processing speed, global development delay, stammering, Tourette syndrome, brain injury, PTSD, and also in line with this kind of theoretical paradigm is also mental illness and mental health. Now again, like part of why we've, as race scholars and sociologists that are interested in communicating research outside of the academy, use neurodiversity is because we see it as something which can bring more people with us. It's something that affects so many different people from so many different walks of life. And when we're looking at trying to explain to people how hegemony works, for example, this has been a really useful term for us to bring people together and to help them understand how we need to dismantle power.
Brilliant. And I guess it lends itself to kind of broader considerations for just kind of hope, love and trust more broadly. And I guess given the kind of global and political turbulence we find ourselves in, what would you say are the kind of best instruments to kind of mobilize those things? Because I guess as sociologists, part of what we do is kind of disrupting and dismantling through many different means and instruments. But this kind of global political turbulence has made our lives and our work and our praxis a lot more difficult. So what would you kind of say to that?
I think it's really interesting, Jay, and I think this was one of the things that came up when we were writing up the book, because, and you might hear this from the tone in which we're talking in today, like we're very utopian, we're very hopeful, even amongst so much global despair. And I guess part of that is because we see the global movement towards liberation for all as one requiring lots of different roles. And I guess part of mine and Jason's role in this work is to be the kind of hopeful ones, is to be the people that point out the things that are quote unquote going right, or is to point to the different parents, carers and families that are making it happen on the ground. Now, you can't just have us in this movement, like you need multiple different groups of people communicating in different ways, and it's important to have your kind of critical analysis that is very much looking at how much of a disaster is across the globe at the moment. But for us, and similarly to Stuart Hall as well, it's in times of crisis where you see the gaps in the terrain, where you see the hope, is where we're constantly trying to find things, and that's what guides a lot of our work at the moment.
I think that hope and kind of just leaning on the work of Stuart Hall, I think one of the things that's interesting is this idea, particularly in the UK, if we kind of domesticize it, of a broken society.
Yeah.
And I guess in terms of kind of trust, how has our trust been broken globally? Because I guess the theme of this particular plenary is trust, and I guess there is a sense of broken trust globally at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And coming back to our previous kind of reasonings and ponderings when we came to writing the book, is it comes back to us to subjectivity. So how have we interacted with institutions? How has our lived experience informed our practice? But that being the starting point, then if that's the starting point, where can we see the gaps and where can we see where harm continues? And for us, bell hooks has been really, really important for us, not just with looking at love as the solution, but lovelessness as the cause. And lovelessness for us works in tandem with global capitalism production. So in a society where profits are by far seen as more important than human life, of course we're going to get a social reproduction of lovelessness over and over and over again. And part of that is by creating a culture where we become distrustful of people. And that distrust is why profit over people continues to carry on, because we are broken away from that collective consciousness. So the way lovelessness carries on for us in thinking about the neurodiversity paradigm is that disabled folk, the neurodiverse community in general, are so often overlooked. They're so often overlooked, and they're so often seen as groups that are undeserving of ordinary and dignified lives and are thus undeserving of love. So for us, it kind of, the circle to get back to a loving practice requires us to look at how lovelessness continues to be socially reproduced alongside a idealization of capitalist production.
In terms of kind of pivoting off capitalist production and just thinking kind of globally, we're in a room full of sociologist siblings, for want of a better term. And I guess, what reason do sociologists have to remain hopeful and trusting in the current pre-context that we find ourselves in?
Am I doing all right? Have I missed a slide? Are we good?
Someone's going to pinch me in the arm if we're doing all right. So we're doing good. Doing good.
Again, so where we're coming from with our book, it's just a small part of a larger global project of other really amazing critical thinkers that are thinking about how can we take our scholarship and understanding of race and class in particular and bring it to a more kind of multi-ethnic, multi-class solidarity lens. And we're using neurodiversity in this way, and also love. Now, for us as sociologists, and it's so amazing being in a room with so many sociologists, by the way. I don't get to be around as many sociologists anymore. I'm in Black British Studies. But anyway, as sociologists, part of our job now is to remain critical, but it's also about a return to self. Now, for bell hooks, the love ethic required us to understand what loving ourselves meant like in order to produce a love in politics for the rest of society. Now, Bell's really prescriptive about this, and part of the loving of self is so we can produce work and can produce collectives that are disrupting of lovelessness. Because if we are not pouring into ourselves in a way that recognises our differences, our different experiences, then we're not going to be able to truly love difference as well. So for Bell, it's about self-awareness, it's about self-acceptance, it's about self-responsibility, it's about self-assertion, and it's about purposeful living. What is the purpose? What is my role as a sociologist? And it doesn't have to be a huge, huge role. Every drop makes a mighty ocean. And I think sometimes as sociologists, we get really bogged down in the nitty-gritty of crisis, when actually a return to love, what we talk about a lot in the book, is about a return to self and a reminder to ourselves as to why we do the work that we do. In a world where we're so encouraged to be reactionary, we're missing things. And when we're missing things, we're neglecting ourselves and those around us, which means that the politics that we're putting out is not necessarily going to be one that's infused with love and understanding and hope.
You know, one of the things that I think is really interesting is that you've kind of drawn on the work of bell hooks, which has been a massive kind of axis and stimulus for a lot of our ideas. And I guess at this point in time, given the situation we're in kind of from societal point of view, that kind of critical harmony is really important. And I guess, what are the critical thinkers alongside hooks that you think can shape sociologists' thinking in this space?
Are we? Okay. So we mentioned Stuart Hall. Stuart Hall, key for us in terms of thinking about hegemony. We're really interested in how power obviously becomes socially reproduced, both at the micro, interpersonal, and also at the structural. Part of the way hegemony or power is able to keep evolving in so many different ways is because we're constantly in crisis, and it's because a return to self seems so far away. But also for Stuart Hall in particular, and what inspired so much of our work, is it's this tension with representational politics as well. And how do we get to a point of returning to the politics of the matters under study, but also recognising that certain groups holding positions of power is not necessarily going to disrupt hegemony and political domination. And I think for us, particularly as Black scholars, this is a real tension for us, because it's not lost on us that we're one of the very few Black people in this room, and it's an absolute honour to be here. But as a discipline, it's not great that there's not that many of us. So we constantly have to tease between this kind of representational politics and also just the politics of the materiality of life. But equally, we are very clear that the representation will not give us the changes that we need. So Stuart Hall's really key in that way. We haven't got time to go into it in as detail, but we use a lot of Judith Butler's work on unlivable lives in our book. Just really talking about how disability, or the fusion between ableism, racism, and capitalism, makes unlivable lives and makes things really difficult for a lot of people, but it's that fusion which creates a multi-ethnic, it can make a multi-ethnic solidarity because it crosses across multiple groups. How are we doing for time?
8 minutes.
Okay, cool. Sorry, guys. So Judith Butler, Stuart Hall, obviously we've mentioned bell hooks, and of course we're talking about hegemony, so Gramsci as well has been key for us in this work.
Absolutely brilliant. And I guess, you've kind of touched on some of these points already, but just briefly, as sociologists, how can we interweave kind of hope and love within our praxis? So what are the things that sociologists can do to kind of make that a part of their praxis?
So I think for me, I'm always really inspired by people that write about their lived experience or community organising who are outside of the academy. And an incredible book that I read recently, which has just inspired me so much as a sociologist and really made me kind of check myself as well and check my ego, humble myself. It was written by Mina Smallman. It's called A Better Tomorrow. And I don't know if anyone in the room knows who Mina Smallman is, but she's the mother of Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman, who were two black women that were brutally murdered in June 2020 in a park after Bieber's birthday. After they were murdered, the Metropolitan Police revealed to Mina, the mother of her two daughters, that the police had also taken selfies with their bodies and posted them on their WhatsApp groups. Nicole and Mina were murdered by a man that had been radicalised, a young man that had been radicalised online. Many of us in this room will probably consider him to be an incel. And Mina spends her book, which is an autobiography, talking about pain and grief, but talking about her own experiences as a black mixed-race woman coming of age in Britain, her experiences in the church, and how her life, having navigated race, class, and institutions, enabled her to forgive the murderer of her daughters. She understood the tensions between structure and agency and how that they can be so consequential for people that it can result in murder, and a brutal murder at that. And if a mother can forgive something like that, then there is no reason why we can't do anything. It's the most humbling book. It's incredible. I really, really recommend it.
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. In terms of your own praxis, how has love, hope and trust kind of shaped aspects of your own sociological imagination and how you kind of construct your realities as a sociologist?
I think it's similar to what we talk about in the book is the combination of acceptance, humility, looking at our own egos, but really sitting in the unknowing of social life. And look, these are things that sociologists for decades have been saying, and it is, again, it's such an honour for us to sit here and regurgitate these words. But I think a return to self and a return to why we do things is really, really important. It's such an honour to be on this panel with Nira, for example, someone that has inspired so many of us in this room. So I think for me, looking at our siblings globally, locally, that those people that have stood up, oppressed people, have always stood up. I mean, I'm not saying all of us in this room are sociologists or oppressed, but we write about their experiences, and that's what guides a lot of my work, yeah.
It's absolutely brilliant. I mean, it's kind of, we're at the end now, nearly, unfortunately, so doing okay for time, I think. So, final question. What is the message of hope that you would like to suggest to black female academics who remain woefully underrepresented and supported across Europe? What should black female academics trust in? So, are there any sisters in the room? No? Okay, so, oh, here we go, hello. Yeah, I mean, I'm a black woman, sociologist, black feminist, proud, very, very proud of how much black women have contributed to my scholarship, my thinking, my growing,
all of it. And I think that we have to look for respect outside of the institution. We have to look at our people and understand what it is that our people need. Many of those needs are about a voice, are about having our stories told. It's about a redistribution of resources. It's about a democratization of education. I think it is woeful how few black women sociologists there are across Europe. And that is not something that's by accident. We are still dealing with the legacies of colonialism, empire, systemic anti-blackness, which impacts sociology in particular, which is quite ironic. But it is an issue in our discipline. And I would ask everyone in this room to really think about how we can, as a collective, do better to represent, highlight, and put forward black women within our communities, within our lives, because, yeah, it's not good enough that there's not that many of us here. And I would say to the sisters, to the black women, to keep going and to work in teams, work collaboratively. You're never on your own. I've always worked collaboratively.
Just to say two things. A few months ago, someone said to me, Jason, like in academia, people are always obsessed with who's the best and who's the best stuff. I know you don't like answering questions like this, Jason, but who do you think is the best? And I said, it's very hard to determine that because academics need that validation. But if you want me to indulge you, I will give it to you. I said, for me, the best is always someone who can perfectly balance a blend of theory, practice, words and actions. And when they asked me this, when I told them this, I said, to that end, for me, I would say the best academic of our generation is Dr. Chantelle Jessica Lewis. Nice. So we've been really fortunate to kind of hear from Chantelle today. It's been an absolute privilege to do this with you. It's been an absolute privilege to dine with some of the finest in Europe. So thank you so much. We both really appreciate it.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Chantelle. I think that you have been appealing to all of us, to this full audience, and we will discuss. So now it's the turn of Nira Yuval-Davis.
Thank you very much. It's a bit of a hard act to come after Chantelle and Jason, but I think quite a lot of the things that I'm going to say would echo some of the things that they've said, although I think in a darker tone than the very overall optimistic one that they have talked about. I'm very grateful to be not just to be invited here to speak, but also to be asked to speak about the theme of trust, because this is not something that I articulated to myself before, how it relates to actually to my work. But the more I reflected about it, I could see how important and central it is to all, not just my work, but I think to the whole sociological work in general. I think that the trust is one issue in which, for example, political science and sociology differ absolutely. Because political science was very much, the founding fathers like Hobbes and Locke and so on, were very interested in social contract. But the sociological imagination has been interested about what would make people trust that such a contract would be respected. And this is where different founding fathers of sociology have said the sacred and the secular and the social norms or whatever. I don't have time to go into all these details. But what is common to all this is that we need a pre-contractual trust in order for any notion, not just of social order, but also of bonding, of belonging, to any of the imagined communities. Ben Anderson talked about only the national community as imagined community, but all political projects of belonging, whether it's a nation or a race or a religion or the people or the planet, all assume certain kind of trust that beyond ourselves, I mean, you talked about collective consciousness. It doesn't necessarily always have to be constructed as a collective consciousness, but definitely it has to be a trust that there is something beyond. And in terms of hope, only if there is a trust that even if we fail, something or somebody of whom we trust and we feel some kind of bonds of belonging, whether temporarily or spatially detached, would actually eventually will succeed. But I think that we are in the midst, or maybe definitely beyond the beginning stage, of a very major crisis of trust. And in my work, I articulated it quite a few years, definitely since the banking crisis, as a double crisis of governability and governmentality, in which we found ourselves, so much so that I would actually accept Nancy Fraser's claim that we have, because of that, of the crisis of global neoliberalism, we are moved beyond it, but we are intergenome, we are stuck, and no new system has been yet constructed. What do I mean by the double crisis of governability and governmentality? Because of global neoliberalism, governments have not been able anymore, even when they wanted to, not all governments of course want to, represent the interest of the citizens. They had to become the executive negotiating with the supra-state, but also corporations and transnational ones, which have economic and political power, especially economic one, 100 times more than any even rich states. Because of that, we also got a crisis of governmentality, when people feel that it doesn't matter which government is in power, it's all going to be the same, and it's not going to be beyond rhetoric. It's not going to represent their interests. And what we see in this double crisis, we have top-down response of states and bottom-up responses of people. The top-down response of states have been to, I will show you, we do represent your interest, and this is where securitization comes. We will show you that we can keep you safe and secure, and we are able to keep the state to those who belong and keep away the ones who do not belong. And we see the development of the technology of everyday bordering replacing the technology of multiculturalism, which have been used since Second World War, more or less to keep in control issues of social and political diversity. And everyday bordering means that bordering and borders are not just in contact places from one state to another, but they're everywhere and every day, whether it's in employment, whether it's in train station, whether it's in people's home. And citizens are required to become unpaid, untrained border guards. So if you are a landlord, if your tenant proved to use forged papers, you run the risk, if it's not more than once, that you would go to prison because you are not a good border guard, although you are unpaid and untrained. Although the professional border guards, of course, would never face this kind of criminalization in this kind of way. So we see a culture which heightened and sensitized people instead of neurodiversity that you're talking about, sensitize people to the difference between them, between those that belong and those who do not belong. And the bottom-up response has been the rise, which complements it and affecting it and being affected by it, is the rise of autochtonic, nativist type of extreme authoritarian right, both secular and religious, in different places, very often in collusion with each other. What is interesting about this nativist politics of belonging, that it is a much emptier and elastic notion than the older one, which are kind of pure race, pure ethnicity, pure nation. So if you look at the new right everywhere, they say, oh, we are not racist, but, and it's always the but. This is why we've seen, for example, in the UK, the paradox of the last Tory government, which has been the most racially and ethnically diverse of any government in the history of Britain and almost, I think, any other Western government, and at the same time, the most racist. And what is interesting is that the racialization has been towards those who did not belong. Not only the so-called illegal migrants, because and the asylum seekers, because one of the things that Rishi Sunak had on the agenda for the election is to cap the numbers of all migrants, even if they're legal, even if they fulfill roles which are vital for the economy, vital for the society, because the boundary of the bordering between those who belong and who do not belong has become absolutely vital. And what we see as a result of that, both locally and globally, that more and more people, whether they manage to cross the border or not, and we have interviewed people who have tried every night for 3 years to cross the border and failed and arrested and released and so on. People embody the borders. Their lives have become suspended between places rather than what we called in our work on bordering gray zones. And more people and more sections of society and neighborhood, and both spatial, social spatial and physical spatial, become part of these horrible gray zones. And that have brought me to reflect upon the theorization of racism, which I have, I and many others, definitely my colleagues in social scientists against hostile environment, have been reflected upon, because we kind of argued that there are two main logics of racism, one of exploitation and one of exclusion. The ultimate form of exploitation is slavery, and the ultimate form of exclusion is genocide. But I've come to realize that this is not so, because in genocide, you have a named other that you feel you have to annihilate for your own safety, either physical or cultural or whatever. But another form of ultimate exclusion is those who don't have any name, any identity, any right to live, any right to exist, any entitlement for any rights. Hannah Arendt and Agamben after her said that the role of human rights should start when the realm of civil rights ends. But what we see is that usually when the application of civil rights, those who are entitled to citizenship, end, then human rights also vanish. I mean, Hannah Arendt articulated it, the Second World War, where international law and refugees law and so on did not exist. But what we see now when it does exist, that governments spend much more money and resources trying to overcome the implications of this international legislation rather than development and protect more people. So I call this kind of racism, what Judith Butler called ungrievable life, as necro-racism. And necro-racism is part of what Achilles' member have talked about, necropolitics, which I think is a very important theoretical as well as political addition to other theories and like the biopolitics of Foucault that talked about power and governance of all realms of life. Bembe points out that power does not only control people's lives and what they have and what they don't have, it also gives them the right on death. Not just about killing people, of course they are doing it, but who is protected from death, who is grieved or named by death. We have seen thousands and thousands of people dying in the Mediterranean with no name. We have thousands dying in the desert between Mexico and the United States, just to mention two popular foci of where people who are stuck in the gray zones were trying to cross the borders to safety, to entitlement, which very often, even if they manage to do it, another gray zone is waiting for them on the other side. Necropolitics celebrate. Because what we see with the collusion and intensification of the interrelationship between the everyday bordering and autochtonic politics is that more and more people are excluded. And more resentment is built for any kind of entitlement for anybody who does not belong, which is very frightening to more and more of us. So, of course, we need to look at necropolitics as complementing a lot of the theoretical development about racial capitalism as distributors of resources globally, because this is economic and social and political resources, but these are resources also of life and death. So what do we do about it? Where do we go from there? Usually when I give talks, I like to end with presenting a politics of hope, because we need politics of hope. And if I can't, I quote Gramsci about the pessimism of the mind, which we all have, and the optimism of the soul. Although I must say, especially since October 7th, any optimism of the soul, I have less and less. Because it's not just the people that kind of drowned. Since the Iraq War, we have this amazing notion of collateral damage. Recently, and this is just one of illustrative example, Israel so-called rescued some of the people that were kidnapped on October 7th. 5 people, 250 people, Palestinian dead, many of them women and children at the same time, and 3 other kind of Israeli kidnapped at the same time. So this is so-called collateral damage. So is this kind of necro-racism is not just in terms of bordering to particular states and not just in terms of particular issues, but this is a global degradation of human lives of those, the fewer and fewer who are entitled and who belong. And these are constructions which are not purely North and South, although the motto overall is basically the global North versus the global South, and Southern minority in the North. But it is much more complex. If you look, for example, at contemporary India, you cannot just talk about it as part of the victimized, racialized global South, for example. So if I cannot finish with a politics of hope, I want to finish with a politics of care. I've long, in my Politics of Belonging kind of book, I kind of constructed politics of care as a feminist political project of belonging. Wishful thinking, but I think some of us managed to do it more than others. But I think we also, when we talk about politics of care, there are many different kinds of political projects of care. And I want to mention here just two. One is a transversal solidarity, because of course trust and solidarity are almost interchangeable. And transversal politics of care and solidarity are those who work together across borders and boundaries, but they share the same values and therefore can have a long-term alliances. And then another form of politics of care is of human rights defenders, that all of us, whatever we think about the politics or the values or the actions of the other, we have to defend their rights. We have to construct their lives as grievable lives and as named lives, as those that we have to learn somehow, some way, to live together and to trust that we can. And this is risky and dangerous. And the danger is not evenly distributed. The cost for some kind of solidarity across borders and boundaries can be much higher to some than others. Power and uneven positioning and situated intersectional gazes do not disappear just because we wish them to be. So they have to be incorporated into it, but they should not prevent us from trying to get on with it. There's so much more to say, but I think I'll pause now. Thank you very much.
Well, I think that Nira and Chantelle and Jason have really inspired us and have really connected trust with love and care. And even though you didn't finish, you say that you didn't finish with politics of hope, I think that you did. So now it's time to open the floor. So we have microphones in the room. So maybe we can collect some questions and speakers. Okay, I see here one hand. So maybe we can start there. Yes.
Thank you very much. I just had a question about neurodiversity. I found it a bit of a... How do you use that as an anti-essentialist concept? Because I find that you were listing various kind of psychiatric categories which form a part of neurodiversity, and I'm wondering how you use neurodiversity as an anti-essentialist concept, because I struggle to see it in anti-essentialist terms, I suppose.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Shall I start, Jay, and then do you want to... What's your name, sorry? Sam, that's such a great question. And it's like the biggest tension in all of our work, because at the end of the day, like, we don't want to live in an essentialist world, and like, we want to be resistant to categories. However, we do live in a global capitalist society that is racialized and class, and as Nira so beautifully analysed just then, like, life is not evenly distributed even amongst marginalisation. Now, that being said, like, two of the biggest tensions in our book is the ideas around diagnosis and what that does or doesn't do, but also the need to understand difference and resist neurotypical hegemony. So we didn't really get to talk about it as much today because we wanted to focus more on love, hope, and trust, but how we deal with it specifically, the essentialist ideas, is really focusing on neurotypical hegemony. Now, situating neurotypical hegemony as that being those that tick certain boxes to be seen as the ideal citizen, and actually that is such a flimsy category that, like, no one really sits within it. So it's like, how do we keep pointing out all these incredibly, like, bureaucratic, silly things, basically, that we do across society, and how actually neurodivergence helps us to resist those things. And how we talk about neurotypical hegemony is that this becomes a way of organising functionality or productivity as another guise for race, class, and gender as well. So it's very much a kind of Marxist analysis, but at the same time, like, we do, as black people that have grown up in the UK as neurodivergent people, also from working class backgrounds, it would just not be honest of us to not talk about the importance of categorization, simply forgetting resources. Jay, do you want to say anything else? Yeah.
You absolutely capture that.
Thank you. More questions? It's a challenge to see the full room. There is one hand there, down there. No.
Thank you. Both the papers and both the talks, such fascinating thoughts, and I've made lots of notes. And trust is a very difficult thing at this time, so I think there's a lot of hope that we've got from both talks. My question was really around co-option and what we might think about co-option, particularly building on Nira's point and thinking about co-option in relation to maybe neurodiversity or even race. Nira's point was that the most diverse, racially diverse Tory government produces the most racist immigration policies. How might we think about the use of representational co-option that maybe capitalism or various structures do, and the uses of co-option, of maybe co-opting neurodiverse people? Chantelle already hinted at representation not solving problems. Can that in fact hide the problems? You know, the politics of representation actually hiding racist or sexist or ableist dynamics. I'd love to hear any thoughts on co-option that the speakers might have. Thanks. And I'm Shannon, by the way.
Shannon. Thank you, Shannon.
Hi, Shannon.
It's interesting that you raised the issue of co-option. Many, many years ago, I used to think myself as an anarchist, and a close friend who was a socialist, also a sociologist. We were, at that time, the only two anti-Zionist Israeli sociologists. And he was trying to convert me from anarchism to socialism. And he said, let's read the literature, the anarchists, the Marxists, and the sociological literature on co-option. And let's see where it's going to lead. At the end of it, I became socialist rather than anarchist, because I understood that you cannot do away with power, you can only redistribute it. And this has been very foundational in all my sociological theorization, of course, as well as the political one. So I agree with you that co-option is a danger, and I agree with you that any kind of social change and any kind of those who try to influence social change, especially, I mean, I haven't had time at all to talk about all the role of the social media and conspiracy theory and so on. I mean, I'm sure Jason and Chantelle have a lot to say about it as well. But of course, this is a major danger which has to be named, which has to be reflected upon, and thank you for raising it.
Chantelle or Jason, do you want to?
Just to kind of lean on the point that you made, I mean, I think the redistribution of power, I think it's quite an interesting thing, and kind of, I guess we're in this kind of space of identity politics and kind of using identity and kind of actors in that space as kind of political instruments of division. I think the Tory government, to all extents and purposes, as you've said, most diverse government up until this particular one in the UK, were the architects of a lot of things that have brought significant harm and created a hostile environment for many ethnic minority people, particularly within the UK. So I think it is a great advert that, or a great example that diversity doesn't always equal the change that we want to see. But I think what it also represents is this idea that actually identity politics is a really strong vehicle for driving self-interest. And I think that is something that has become, unfortunately...
Some of the people that we'd see ourselves as having the most in common with are required to keep this going. It's part of social reproduction. Like, it's always been there. It just looks different now. So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting few years for those of us that are interested in, race, class, and capitalism in particular. Because, as Jason said, the politics of self-interest is, front and center.
Thank you. There is one question there.
Hey, thank you so much for your amazing presentations. And I'm doing identity politics, woman speaking. I'm from the audience as well. I was wondering, how would you address the possible dangers of the politics of care as well? Because care can be a beautiful thing and sometimes is, but also increasingly we see the politics of care mobilized for carceral purposes or punitive purposes. And I mean, for example, women being constructed as victims to be saved. Increasingly, we see children being mobilized as objects by some, I would say, to target gay communities, queer communities, trans communities, etc. We see a lot of carceral politics targeting migrants as well, like in, for example, homo-nationalism and feminine nationalist politics, when, you know, women of color are being constructed as victimized by men of colors and in need of saving, etc. And I think this is like a vehicle of also othering migrant communities in different contexts. And in this, like, given that, I just wanted to ask you, what's your take on the possible dangers of the politics of care?
Yeah.
Thanks. Agata.
Thank you very much for your question, because I mentioned that I developed the politics of care as a feminist political project of belonging, and I very much there discuss what kind of politics of care, because some versions of politics of care constructed women as the mothers, and therefore, essentially are the one who are the carers. Also, of course, caring relationships always involve, again, power, and it can be exploitation of both the cared and the carer. And another thing I didn't have time, and which is in my written paper, which relates to Agamben called the victims of necropolitics and grey zone as bare lives. And some of us have criticized him because he constructed them as lacking agency, because they are only the objects of the policy and exploitation and so on. So I very much agree with you that when we talk about politics of care, this is not the kind which we want. I very much follow, with some changes, but the spirit of John Tronto's approach to the politics of care, which is linked to citizenship. I mean, all of us, when we are born and before we die, need care, and most of us also in between. So to divide the population between those who do the caring, those who need care, is always false. As long as we name and respect and give agency to everyone and look at caring relationship as a social relationship in which both sides have a say, not always the same and often not the same amounts of power or the same kind of power, I think this is where we have to look at it. But the care is the basis. Rights are not enough, because rights are abstract. Care is a practice, and we need practice, not just abstract rights.
Chantelle, do you want to?
Yeah, that was amazing, Nira, yeah. Just a small addition, kind of repetitive from what I said before, but it is about praxis, and like Bell Hooks' love ethic, I just think is so intentional with how we do this work. And what she's saying is talking about a love of oneself in order to love difference, in order to love all people. So as Nira said, like from birth, we have the right to be free and to live fully and well. But obviously power is unevenly distributed. Our lives are unevenly distributed. So a return to self allows us to look at where we are within those structures and how we implement a praxis and politics of care within our lives. So self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-assertion, self-responsibility and purposeful living. This is what everyone should be able to have. That is a loving and caring life.
I think maybe we can have one more question. It is there.
Thank you all very much for your talks. My question is directed to Nira. There was a couple of things that you said during your talk which I wanted to ask for you to elaborate a little bit. You said that after October the 7th, there is less hope. I wonder if there is an implicit positionality here, because on October the 6th, for the Palestinians, there was no hope. And I wonder if this is something that you account for, at least in your work, because for them it didn't change. There was no hope on October the 6th, there was no hope on October the 7th, there's no hope today as well. And then there was also a part of your talk, and I really appreciate the politics of care. I understand the value of it, and it resonates with me, but at the same time, I can't help but feel that sometimes in the way that you phrase particular bits of your ideas, it seems a little bit problematic. For example, there was a particular point when you said, regardless of the actions of the other, we should still maintain their rights. It's almost as if that for the Israelis, they have to put aside what happened on October the 7th and maintain their care for the rights of the Palestinians. But what about the importance of the Israelis reflecting on their own actions that led to the very conditions that created October the 7th? Thank you.
Thank you. There is another question, maybe we can...
No, I think I need to answer
Go
that
ahead.
immediately, because I think I mentioned it, but maybe you didn't hear. I've been an anti-Zionist Israeli Jew when there were I knew personally everyone. I'm very happy that we are so many now that I don't know all of them. And I have been one of the first ones who have theorized the Zionist project as a settler colonial project. I've edited a book, Unsettling Settler Societies, in which I wrote with Nahala Abdo the chapter on Israel-Palestine. So I've been aware and have been part of the struggle against not just the occupation. I started when it was still the military government against the Palestinians who have been citizens of Israel. I'm that old, in the mid-60s. We were very naive when they abolished it at 66. We thought that maybe we are winning, which was very naive. And then, of course, 67 happened. So I definitely agree with you. However, I do not agree with you that there is no hope. I don't think there is any hope in the near future, and this is why I've been absolutely depressed for years now, but especially from October 7th, because the level of violence and the genocidal intensity, which I gave an example about so-called collateral damage, but also the type of violence that happened also in October the 7th. I'm not saying that it's not understandable, but for me, certain kind of violence I will always object to. And when you kind of, when you said not always agreed with, you thought that I was talking just about the Hamas. As was mentioned in the introduction, I've been a founder member of Women Against Fundamentalism. And fundamentalist movements have arose in all major religions, even in Buddhism in Sri Lanka. And they have had terrible, terrible approach to any kind of entitlement and respect to human, especially women's lives, and respect. I don't want to go over all the things that I've been doing. It's not relevant here. What is relevant is that there are many people all over the world with whom I have fundamental difference of values, and I object to their practices towards women, towards other people who do not belong, and also to people in their community. However, I will not use it to justify that they have no right to live, that they have no right to civil rights, to economic rights, to political rights. This is what I object to, of whatever kind and of whatever nationality, whatever ethnicity, racism, gender, ability, age. And this is what I was talking about.
I will offer if Chantelle or Jason want to say like some last words to close the panel.
What nice words should we say, Jay? Oh, our book's out next year. Please get it. Next autumn with Princeton. Yeah, I think that, like Nira said, like there is hope. I can feel hope. I can definitely feel hope. And I think that it's up to us as sociologists to work out the best ways to communicate our research outside of the university, to bring people with us, and to use our discipline as a way for offering hope as well. Anything, Jay?
Yeah, just to finish to say it's an absolute buzz to be here. And just, yeah, thank you so much for the gracious time you've given the four of us up here. So it really means a lot. And just, yeah, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the evening. Just thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's the panel will end here, and I would like to thank you, all of you, and also the public for this extraordinary evening. And now those of you who have the ticket for dinner or for the party, we will move downstairs to initiate the party.